We thought this was going to be a normal trip. Just me and my 3 friends, Mark, Jason, and Eric. A weekend in the woods. No phones, no distractions, just nature. Mark was the one who found the place. Some old hiking trail that wasn't even on most maps anymore. He said it was perfect. Remote, quiet, untouched. Exactly what we wanted. We packed up Friday morning and drove for hours, deep into nowhere. The road turned to dirt, then to nothing. Just trees on all sides. When we finally parked, we still had to hike another 2 miles to the campsite. No one else was out there. That should have been a red flag. The first few hours were great. We set up the tents, gathered firewood, joked around. Jason kept saying we should have brought more beer. Eric was already talking about how amazing the stars would look at night. For a while, it felt normal, peaceful. Then, as the sun started setting, I noticed something weird. The forest was too quiet. No birds, no rustling, no insects. Just stillness. Man, this place is dead, Jason laughed, tossing a rock into the trees. It made a loud thud. No echo, no scattering animals. Just silence. I tried to ignore it. Maybe we were just imagining things. Maybe it was normal this deep in the woods. But deep down, something felt off. That night, we sat around the fire, telling dumb stories. Mark brought up some local legends, stuff about people getting lost in these woods, never coming back. Jason kept interrupting, saying it was all BS. At some point, I looked away from the fire, and I swear I saw something in the trees. Not a person, not an animal, just something, a shape, a shadow, barely visible between the trunks. Watching us, I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks. Later that night, I woke up. Something was outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of the guys getting up to pee. But then I heard it. Slow footsteps, circling the tents. Crunch, crunch, not moving in a straight line. Just pacing, waiting. I held my breath, heart pounding. I wanted to say something, to call out, but something told me not to. Then after what felt like forever, the footsteps stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Morning came too slowly. I barely slept, and when I finally did, I had dreams I couldn't quite remember. Just flashes of trees stretching too high, of something moving between them. When I got out of my tent, Jason was already up, poking at the fire pit with a stick. Mark sat on a log, half asleep. Eric was still inside his tent, snoring. No one mentioned anything weird from the night before. I thought about telling them what I'd heard. The footsteps, the feeling of something watching. But I didn't. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was just tired. We ate a quick breakfast, protein bars, some jerky, and started talking about what to do for the day. Mark suggested gathering more firewood before we hiked further into the forest. He said we could try to find a stream, maybe even a clearing with a better view of the sky. Jason groaned. "Bro, I don't want to spend the whole day carrying wood around." Mark just laughed. "We need it for the fire. Don't be lazy." In the end, we split up. Mark went off by himself to grab some wood while the rest of us packed light bags for the hike. We weren't worried. Not at first. But an hour passed. Then another. And Mark never came back. At first, we just figured he was taking his time. Maybe he found something cool. An old cabin, a weird tree, whatever. But after the 3rd hour, Jason started getting annoyed. "Dude, what the hell is taking him so long?" He kicked a rock toward the fire. "I swear, if he's messing with us." I felt uneasy. Mark wasn't the type to wander off without saying anything. We decided to look for him. The deeper we went into the woods, the quieter everything felt. There was no wind, no rustling. The trees felt taller, closer together. Then we found his flashlight. It was lying on the ground next to a half-made pile of sticks. Still on, the beam cutting through the dirt like he had just dropped it. Jason picked it up. The metal was warm. Mark had been here. Recently. But he was gone. "Mark?" I called out. my voice sounding too loud in the empty forest. Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the trees, we heard it. His voice. "Guys." I exhaled. "Mark." "Dude. Where the hell? Help me." Something about the way he said it made the hairs on my arms rise. His voice sounded off, like he was trying to make it sound normal but couldn't quite get it right. Then it came again. "Guys, help me." Jason looked at me. "What the hell?" I took a step forward, but Eric grabbed my arm. "No," he whispered. "Something's wrong." Jason turned in a circle, scanning the trees. "Where are you?" No answer. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. "Mark?" Nothing. Then a rustling sound. Something moving. I turned my head just in time to see a shadow slip between the trees. Not running. Not walking. Gliding. I grabbed Jason's sleeve. "We need to go." He looked like he wanted to argue, but then the voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." But it wasn't Mark's voice anymore. It was trying to be. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the campsite. Mark never came back. We sat by the fire in silence. No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all felt it. Mark wasn't coming back. Jason kept standing up, pacing in circles, running his hand through his hair. "We need to go back out there." His voice was shaking, but he was trying to act tough. "We can't just leave him." Eric didn't look up. He was staring into the fire, shoulders tense. "You heard it." Jason turned on him. "What the hell does that mean?" Eric finally looked at him. His face was pale. "That wasn't Mark." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "It sounded like him." Eric shook his head. "Not at the end." Jason laughed, but it was the kind of laugh people do when they're scared. "Bro, you're acting like..." "What? Like something's pretending to be him?" "That's stupid." Eric didn't answer. Jason looked at me. "You don't actually believe this, do you?" I didn't know what to say. We sat there in tense silence. The fire cracked, but the woods around us were too still. No wind, no animals, just empty, waiting silence. Eventually, Jason grabbed his flashlight and stood. "Screw this. I'm looking for him." Eric shot up. "Dude, no." Jason yanked his arm away. "You can sit here and cry, or you can help me." He turned and stormed off into the trees. I hesitated. Every part of me was screaming to stay at the fire, to not go back into those trees. But I couldn't just let Jason go alone. I swallowed my fear and ran after him. Eric didn't follow. The deeper we went, the worse it felt. The flashlight beams barely seemed to cut through the dark. The trees felt wrong, too close, their branches twisting together above us like they were trying to trap us in. "Mark!" Jason shouted. "Where the hell are you, dude?" Silence. Then, something moved to our left. I turned my flashlight just in time to see a figure step behind a tree. Jason saw it too. "Dude, Mark!" He jogged toward it. My stomach dropped. "Jason, don't." Too late. He turned the corner around the tree and stopped. I caught up, shining my light. There was no one there. Just trees. Jason turned in a slow circle. His breath was ragged. I saw him. His voice was barely above a whisper. He was standing right here. I didn't know what to say. Then, from behind us, crunch. We spun around. Nothing. Jason's breathing got faster. His hand tightened around the flashlight. "Screw this. Let's go back." I didn't argue. We walked quickly, barely resisting the urge to run. The whole way, I kept my light moving, watching the trees, my ears straining for the sound of footsteps behind us. I swore I heard them. Soft, light, mimicking ours. We broke through the trees and saw the fire still burning at the campsite. Eric stood up when he saw us. "Where's Jason?" I blinked. "What?" He pointed at me. "You just came back alone?" I spun around, my heart jumping into my throat. Jason was gone. I stood there, my body frozen, my breath stuck in my throat. "No," I said. He was right behind me. Eric just shook his head, his face pale. "You came back alone?" That didn't make sense. I had been right next to him. We had been walking together. I didn't hear him stop, didn't hear him get pulled away. He was just gone. I turned back toward the trees, aiming my flashlight into the darkness. "Jason." Silence. Not even an echo. Eric grabbed my arm. "Don't." I pulled away. "We have to go back for him." Eric shook his head, gripping my wrist tighter. "Listen to me." His voice was low, urgent. "Mark disappeared. Now, Jason. If we go back out there, it's going to be us next." I swallowed hard. He was scared. So was I. But we couldn't just leave. Before I could say anything, the voice came. "Guys?" "Jason." I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my flashlight. It was coming from the trees, deeper in where we had just come from. I exhaled, relief flooding my chest. "Jason." "Dude." "Where did you?" "Help me." I stopped. The way he said it, the same way Mark had. The tone was right. The words were right. But something about it was wrong. Eric took a step back. I could feel the tension rolling off him. Then Jason's voice came again, closer this time. "Guys, where are you?" I turned my flashlight toward the sound, but all it hit was trees. My skin prickled. Eric whispered, "That's not Jason." I didn't want to believe him, but he was right. Something was speaking in his voice. Another crunch of leaves. Closer. Eric grabbed my wrist. Inside the tent. "Now." I didn't argue. We dove into my tent, zipping it shut, as if that thin layer of fabric would keep us safe. Outside, the footsteps kept moving, circling the tent. Slow, deliberate. Then came the worst part. The zipper moved. Something was trying to open the tent. I clamped my hand over the zipper, gripping it tight. Silence. Then, inches from my face, right outside the thin layer of fabric. "Let me in." It was Jason's voice. Eric sucked in a shaky breath, barely keeping himself from making a sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself not to answer. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. For a long time, neither of us moved. We just sat there, shaking, waiting for morning. The night lasted forever. Every time I thought I could close my eyes, I'd hear something, a faint rustling, the sound of movement just outside the tent. Not pacing anymore, just waiting. Eric didn't sleep either. I could hear his breathing, shallow and shaky, as we both lay there, frozen, listening. At some point, I must have passed out from exhaustion, because when I opened my eyes, it was morning. Bright, quiet. For a second, I thought maybe it had all been a bad dream. Then I saw Eric, still awake, still sitting up, staring at the tent wall. His face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the zipper. I hesitated. Then slowly, I unzipped the tent. The first thing I saw was Jason's flashlight. It was lying on the ground, just outside the tent, still on, still shining, like he had just dropped it. I swallowed, my throat dry. That flashlight hadn't been there when we ran into the tent last night. Something had left it there. Eric finally stood, stretching his legs. He looked like he hadn't moved all night. "We need to go." I nodded. The two of us packed up as fast as we could. We barely spoke. There was nothing to say. We were the only two left. As we started moving, I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods felt wrong, like the trees had shifted overnight. The path back to the car felt less familiar, like we hadn't come this way before. That's when we saw the symbols, carved into the trees. Dozens of them, scratched into the bark. Circles, spirals, lines that didn't make sense. Some were deep, like someone had taken a knife to the wood. Others looked old, like they had been here for years. I ran my fingers over one of the carvings. The bark felt warm. Eric's voice was tight. "These weren't here before." I turned in a slow circle, my chest tightening. The symbols weren't just on one tree. They were everywhere, surrounding us. Eric took a step back. We need to. Then we heard it. Footsteps, coming from the trees. Slow, heavy, moving toward us. Eric grabbed my arm. Run. We took off. Branches whipped at my face. My legs burned. But I didn't stop. I could hear something behind us, keeping pace, never quite running but never slowing down either. Then the trees thinned, and I saw it. The road. The car was right where we left it. We sprinted toward it, my hands fumbling for the keys. I could feel it behind me, could feel eyes on the back of my neck, feel the pressure of something just a step away. I threw the car door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut. Eric was right behind me. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I looked up, into the trees, and I saw them. Figures, half hidden in the shadows, watching us, not moving, just standing there, dozens of them, their shapes barely visible between the trunks. I turned the key. The engine didn't start. My breath caught. I twisted the key again. Nothing. Then, from the woods, Jason's voice. Guys? Eric grabbed my arm, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't listen to it. I twisted the key one last time. The car roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas, and we tore down the dirt road, away from that place, away from them. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We didn't stop driving until we saw buildings, people, civilization. Only then did I finally exhale. Only then did I finally feel safe. Or at least, I thought I was safe. Because when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw the symbols, carved into the back seat door. We didn't stop driving until we hit a gas station on the edge of town. It was one of those small, run-down places with flickering lights and a bored cashier behind the counter. I pulled into a spot and shut off the engine. My hands were still shaking. Eric didn't move. He just sat there, staring straight ahead, his face pale and drawn. Neither of us spoke for a while. Then, finally, I found my voice. The symbols. Eric exhaled slowly. I saw them. I turned in my seat and looked at the back door. The carvings were shallow, but they were there. The same spirals, the same lines from the trees. I ran my fingers over them. The grooves felt fresh, like they had just been carved. My stomach twisted. How the hell? Eric shook his head. I don't know. I felt sick. We had left that place. We had escaped. So, why was it still with us? I didn't want to think about it anymore. I just wanted to go home. Eric must have felt the same, because he muttered, "Let's just get out of here," and reached for the door handle. Then we heard it. A knock. On the back window. We both froze. Slowly, I turned my head. There was no one there. I swallowed hard, my skin crawling. Did you hear that? Eric nodded slowly, his fingers white-knuckled on his lap. I looked around the parking lot. A single pickup truck sat at the far pump, but no one was inside. The cashier was still behind the counter, not paying attention to us. The lot was empty. I turned back to Eric. Let's go. We pulled out of the gas station and drove in silence. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see something in the back seat. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching ahead. Eventually, Eric spoke. We're not telling anyone. I frowned. What? He stared out the window, his voice flat. No one will believe us. They'll just say Mark and Jason got lost. That we panicked and left. I clenched my jaw. We didn't panic. We ran. I didn't answer. Because he was right. We had run, and now they were gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voices. Mark, Jason, calling for help. But the worst part, at some point, just as I was finally drifting off, I heard something else. A soft, slow sound. Scratch. Right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath. Scratch. Scratch. Then, a voice. So close it could have been just on the other side of the wood. "Let me in." I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just lay there, frozen, staring at the door. The handle twitched, and then silence. I don't know how long I lay there before I finally worked up the nerve to check. But when I did, when I slowly got out of bed and reached for the knob with shaking fingers, the door was unlocked. I know for a fact that I had locked it, and when I opened it, the hallway was empty. But there was something on the floor, a single, carved symbol, scratched into the wood. I'm still not sure if we ever really left those woods, or if we just brought something back with us.